Hey guys, and welcome back for another video. If you missed it last weekend, we had a preview event or a beta of the first map of Path of Fire. This also meant that we got access to the first chapter of the story, but I'm not going to cover that today. I'd rather focus on the map itself and some of the new features. So how was the map? Well, the map, just like many maps in Guild Wars 2, was everything we've come to expect. I mean, it was a really pretty place to explore, and at least so far, it doesn't seem like it's just going to be a bunch of sand to ride mounts through. When you hear about 5 maps bigger than any that have come before it, and it's set in a desert, you might kind of worry about that sort of thing. They did tell us in the trailer that that's not going to be the case, but until you play it, you don't really know for yourself. This is in part because they're borrowing the adventure system from Heart of Thorns and the repeatable hearts from Living World Season 3. Now, I only got to play one adventure during this event, and it was more or less just a supply run on my mount, but I didn't really have a problem with the adventures in Heart of Thorns, and I think that as long as they're expanded upon a bit in the expansion, these could be really good. Now, I might be a little bit optimistic about this, but keep in mind, the one I did put me on a mount, and mounts are new, so I'm obviously excited about that. But guys, riding the mount felt really good. I've seen posts about people complaining that it doesn't feel like the player character, and honestly, is it supposed to? I mean, your player is riding something, shouldn't it feel like that? You can't make everybody happy, I guess. But to me, that's what it felt like. I felt like I was riding something. The Raptor was also pretty fast. I'm not sure if each mount will have its own top speed, but it's definitely a lot faster than moving around normally. You press spacebar to do the dash forward we saw in the trailer, and it is pretty good at clearing chasms as well as just giving yourself a little extra boost. The leap does cost a little bit of endurance, but it's nowhere near as bad as the half circle we lose when we dodge. I do wish that there was some kind of normal jump you could do, and I'm not sure if this is a thing. I didn't encounter this when I was playing, but occasionally you would need to jump and you would just dash forward. So far, that's my only real complaint, at least regarding the Raptor. Another nice surprise was that you can actually dye the mounts. For the Raptor, this only changed the top half of the scales, but it was still a nice little thing they didn't have to add. Just like with gliders, I'm sure there'll be gem store skins, and I hope that if there are some cool ones out there that at least we'll be able to dye those as well. We already know that the mounts don't have any kind of combat capability outside of opening up for combat, but that skill actually does a fair amount of damage. For the Raptor, we get a tail spin as our one ability. This dismounts us, and the Raptor will spin around and do a bit of damage before disappearing. And by fair amount of damage, I don't mean that you need to start every bit of combat this way. It's just that it does more damage than I expected it to. Don't think for a second that you're going to be able to take on champions or anything like that solely because you have this ability, but especially on lower level enemies like groups of spiders I encountered, I basically one-shot them just with the Raptor. Outside of the spiders though, most of the enemies were all new. I personally love the design of Balthazar's army of the Forged, and the Koya are just amazing. I mean, look at these things. We saw them in the trailer, and they're just as horrifying in person. While most of the Forge I fought felt more or less like Mordrum, I did encounter a veteran Forged Cannonade, I think it's called. And this guy has a mechanic at least. That was pretty interesting. Periodically, he'd put his arms down and pulse fear out. Now, the fear wasn't Pocket Raptor annoying, but there was still an element of, wow, I actually have to focus on this guy for a second to take him out. And I hope we see more of that when this finally does release. The most interesting enemies that I encountered are actually the bounty board enemies. While you're in An Moon, you can go to the bounty board and hover over each of the current bounties, and when you select one, it'll actually just start an event somewhere on the map. You head over there, and hopefully you have some friends. Unfortunately, both times I tried this, I was all alone and got completely destroyed. But despite most of these just being champions, they seem like they have a little bit more going on than what we're used to. If these can scale appropriately with a decent group of people, I think this could be a lot of fun. Now, since I wasn't able to complete a bounty, I don't know if there's like a new currency that's tied to completing these, or if it's just the same as completing a higher level event. But if playing these things solo is any indication of how challenging these could be, at least, I think this could be something great for challenging open world content. It didn't seem like this map had any kind of large meta event on it, but there were still plenty of small events going on all over the place. Of the events I played during the event, I'd have to say my favorite is the Dalyak Escape event, where you get to remain mounted and use your special action hotkey to whip the escaped Dalyak back into its pen. And if you do it too many times, they get mad and you have to fight them. It's good to see that we're still going to be using the special action hotkey in the expansion. I even got to use this to challenge followers of Balthazar for progress on one of the repeatable hearts. After doing the usual Guild Wars 2 thing of just kind of running into a new map and doing all the new events, I started noticing there's a new currency, at least for this map, and that is trade contracts. Completing the daily repeatable hearts will unlock them as a vendor, and you can use those there. I was able to get a couple boxes of crafting materials, which is good to see, and they did have a few crafting recipes, but they basically just had a little bit of flavor text until the actual release. Now, there is something else you can do with these repeatable hearts, and that is identify unidentified gear, a new item you get as loot while playing the expansion. Now, I had seen a screenshot that had kind of shown that unidentified gear was going to be a thing, and I actually got pretty excited about it because I thought maybe this would be a game-wide change and it would finally do away with all those unnecessary sigils we get from salvaging all the blues and greens that are the majority of the loot in the game. But after a bit of testing, I realized that blues and greens are still going to drop, as well as yellows and oranges, but it did seem like unidentified gear was kind of taking the place of a lot of blue and green drops that we normally get. So the obvious advantage to this is that you're going to be able to stack these items and save yourself a bunch of inventory space, and if you should decide to salvage them, it's very easy. It's even included in the salvage all option if you right click a salvage kit. But you probably don't want to do that, or at least you might not want to do it, because if you take these to a repeatable heart vendor, you can actually roll for a higher value than the unidentified gear is. So in my experience playing, all I managed to get was green unidentified gear. I identified a few pieces of this and I didn't get a higher rarity, so I'm not sure how hard it is or how rare it is to get this to happen, but I have read that it is a thing. Also, I'm not 100% sure if we're going to have tiers of unidentified gear in the expansion then, as in exotic unidentified gear and so on. But I do like that you can gamble on some gear and maybe get something better. All of this being said, I can see why some players are a little upset. First of all, it's not like you get to use the trade contracts to identify the gear, you have to spend gold. For the green unidentified gear, it was about 1 silver, 68 copper, and that was per piece of gear. Now, you could easily argue that this is a gamble, so it should cost money, it should cost something anyway. But if my experience is the whole experience, and that's that blues and greens aren't going to drop nearly as often, so the bulk of our loot will be unidentified gear, then this could be a little distressing. And this is going to depend on what you do with your blues and greens. Personally, I salvage mine, which is why I complain about the excess of sigils in my inventory. And I typically do this because I like the crafting materials and I'm still working on maxing out my magic find. The problem here is that the unidentified gear, when salvaged, does not yield any luck. So you're only really getting the crafting materials out of the salvage. This is going to mean that if you want to get some luck, you're going to have to identify the gear and then salvage it. And if you're one of those who sells your blues and greens, it means you have to spend almost the complete value of that blue or green item just to turn it into a blue or green item. Of course, this still gives you the option to get a higher level piece of gear, and that could make you some more money, but I see how this system is less than ideal for players who tend to sell their blues and greens rather than salvage, or for players like me who still need that luck. Anyway you cut it, it's still way too early to make any kind of crazy speculation or think you know how this is going to impact the game. Until we know the drop rate of unidentified gear, as well as the chance that we might be able to get that next level gear, we just can't know for sure. But that, guys, is where I want to call this video. I hope that if you didn't get to play the beta weekend, you kind of know what's going on now. I know I talked about unidentified gear for a while, but it seems to be a bit of a hot topic and something I was very curious about coming into this event. Feel free to let me know what you guys think about unidentified gear or just your weekend playing a part of the expansion. How do you feel about mounts? Do you agree that it should feel like you're riding something, or do you think it feels weird? For those of you who actually completed a bounty, let me know a little bit more about that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. So don't ask how I managed to make this video without mentioning this, but Hydra are amazing!